bring in SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena. This is exactly, Mama Sophie, what I guess the world had been waiting for since this morning. The expectation was that this was going to happen much earlier, but of course the names of those hostages is what was holding up this deal from actually, or ceasefire from taking effect. This is quite huge.
Yes, quite huge. We saw earlier on confirmation from both sides that the ceasefire has commenced. And therefore, I think it is a relief, not only in Gaza, but in Israel, particularly for families of the hostages. And there's hope that their loved ones will be back with their families. And the prayer and hope and expectations from the people around the world will be that this ceasefire will hold so that you can move to the second phase where you will see the release of the bodies of those who have died. But secondly, to ensure that you move to a third phase where you are dealing with the lasting solution to this protracted conflict. And many people would say, not just from the 7th of October 2023, but this 7 decades long conflict, because both sides would want to live side by side in peace. But here you have it, as we were first earlier on around 10:15, you were speaking to Sarah Coates. At that moment when she was talking to you, she received confirmation of names being submitted to Israeli authorities. Yeah. And now the Israel government saying that ceasefire has commenced. So perhaps now the big story is you're now moving these hostages from where they were kept to a place where Hamas will hand them over to the Red Cross, and the Red Cross will then move them to the border where they will hand them over to the Israeli officials. On the other hand, you have now movement in prisons in Israel where Palestinians who were held in prisons, because these are not prisoners. Some of them haven't even gone through the legal processes and the judicial processes, so where you can say they are prisoners. Some of them were just abducted and were taken to those prisons, will be then released also. And therefore, it is a big day, and I think the whole world will be watching.
But certainly the question that you asked is, what is it going to take for this ceasefire to hold? From what we saw in the run-up to when it was due to commence earlier on today, anything possibly from either side, could possibly ruffle the fluidity of this agreement. What should we expect to see that will keep the glue on this ceasefire, holding it together?
Hamas must ensure that they hand over these 3 individuals to the Red Cross, as agreed. And Red Cross must present these 3 hostages to the Israeli authorities at the border by 14:30. On the other hand, Israel must move out of the populated area in Gaza so that there's no standoff, there's no fighting. Because if one can fire one shot, this ceasefire is going to collapse. Secondly, Israel must stick to the agreement by now working on releasing those who are kept in Israeli jails, particularly people that they have agreed that will be released today, the Palestinians. As you can see the visuals there, this is Israel. Now you can see that the families are beginning to converge at Tel Aviv Square, that is famous with families coming there all day long and in the evening, supported by Israelis, to call for release of the hostages. So you can see that this is an indication that preparations are underway. As you can see that table with 3 chairs, it speaks to the 3 that will be released today.
And, from the destruction that we've seen, buildings, a little bit earlier on when we spoke to Tembisa Fakude, asking about, what this deal means for rebuilding. lives have been lost, infrastructure, homes have been destroyed, and it's likely going to take, should the ceasefire hold, it's going to take possibly decades for any kind of rebuilding to actually be seen.
The trauma, Griselda, how do you start with rebuilding when a nation is emotionally traumatized? People are injured, some don't have legs, they don't have arms, they don't have families. This is massive. This is massive. That is why South Africa went to the International Court of Justice. And it will be a year on Thursday, since South Africa went to the International Court of Justice asking for intervention. The world could have saved so many lives if the ruling or the order that was issued by ICJ was respected. The guarantors should have been the international community, particularly the Security Council. But the two or the three superpowers kept arguing and showing their might in the Security Council, and that was not enforced. And Israel continued with bombardment. Now we have 56 people who have died. This morning, the 8 lives that were lost were not, those people were supposed to be alive if the two sides were respecting the agreement, because the ceasefire could have started at 8.
Yeah.
So after 8, bombardment continued. Some people missed the opportunity to leave with literally seconds and hours. This is terrible.
Yeah. So what kind of reaction are we expecting from some of the countries, I guess, that played a key role in ensuring that this ceasefire agreement is reached?
I saw the spokesperson of Qatar is saying that they are now monitoring the situation with the names being handed over and the implementation of the ceasefire. So I think I saw that the Prime Minister of Qatar is in Zimbabwe. We will try and ask our colleague, Effet Musekiwa, if possible, to try and pose the question if media is invited when he is engaging with stakeholders in Zimbabwe in terms of how are they going to ensure that this ceasefire is monitored for implementation. But the Security Council as well and the SG of the UN, unfortunately, you know that Guterres was banned by the Israeli authorities. He was in the Middle East, he was in Lebanon. He could be joining the people in Israel and in Gaza this weekend because he was in the Middle East, but he can't travel to Israel.
Yeah, but in order for this to hold as well, that would definitely need some support from the international community as well. How can the international community support these efforts?
They can only plead and persuade and push their friends, different stakeholders. As you know that with the Middle East, they can ensure that the Hamas sticks to the agreements. And therefore, you then have countries such as the United States of America and those in the north to ensure that Israel doesn't break the ceasefire. And therefore, it is an issue of almost like you don't have the intervention force or the peace force. And therefore, it becomes problematic. It's just the word of mouth.
So with just 2 minutes left, just looking at my clock, I mean, obviously now, in terms of the support that also needs to be given, if you look at countries, for example, like Qatar's Prime Minister, for example, who, in brokering the ceasefire, what does it say about some of these countries and the influence that they've had in regional politics and the effect that it has given to what we're seeing taking place now? Some of these countries, of course.
I think Egypt and Qatar worked very well. They tried their level best. We wouldn't have been where we are today if those countries didn't persuade Hamas to do what they've done in terms of agreeing to a ceasefire. The same with the United States of America, including other countries that are not mentioned that are friends with Israel, like the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, some of those countries in the Middle East, and also the countries in the developed north. And I think you want them to continue to do that, but with these kinds of activities, issues of peacekeeping and peace negotiations, things can turn very bad, when you least expected it, because we are familiar with these issues of engagement in terms of peace and security. As you know, that South Africa has been involved since 1994, and we've covered lots of these kinds of stories. So you just wait and you hope that sense will prevail from both sides.
All right, Sophie Mokoena, SABC News International Editor. You'll certainly be tracking all the latest developments for us on this story throughout the day. It's going to be a very long day into the evening. I guess the anticipation now is for the release of those hostages. And of course, the world will certainly be watching how this particular story unfolds. For how long will the ceasefire hold, or for how long will it stand? If we could just, before we end the show, just show the pictures of those 3 female hostages who were set to be released a little bit later on today.